as the U.S. and Iran inch closer to all-out war again, with the U.S. death toll rising over the weekend. Amid 9 straight days of U.S. strikes, sending gas prices back to the $4 mark. During the weekend, the Pentagon releasing new video of its continued military assault, targeting coastal surveillance sites in an effort to degrade Iran's ability to disrupt traffic through the Strait of Hormuz. Iran now accusing the U.S. of hitting more civilian infrastructure, with state media releasing these images of what appear to show damage to a desalinization plant in southern Iran. Now, NBC cannot determine when or where this video was shot. But NBC has identified stunning video taken over the weekend showing the moment an Iranian missile hit a U.S. airbase in Jordan. You can clearly see the fireball explosion from that attack. The Pentagon today releasing the names of 2 soldiers killed in the attack. First Lieutenant Tyler James Feehan and Private Isabella Gonzalez. The Pentagon also announcing it recovered unidentified remains while searching for an American service member reported missing after the strike. And in a separate incident in Iraq, a U.S. service member was killed during a controlled detonation of a downed Iranian drone. Now, this brings the U.S. death toll as a result of the war to 17. In a post on social media today, President Trump lashing out at Iran over those troops being killed, writing, quote, "Every time Iran kills an American soldier, they will pay for that killing many times over." It echoes the president's comments yesterday, where he appeared to signal the military campaign is not ending anytime soon.
Well, we feel very badly, but, you know, those great people, those great patriots were out there fighting that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. Iran has been very, very badly damaged. They've lost everything almost militarily. They've got very little left. They've got some missiles. They've got some drones. They've got some manufacturing ability, not much. We control the Strait. They don't control anything. So we'll see what happens. This is a far bigger job that we're doing. We were doing a little job of stopping them from having a certain capability. Now we're just ending it. So it's really not the same thing. What we're doing now is we're ending any chance where they can have a nuclear missile.
Despite the military escalation, Secretary of State Marco Rubio still leaving the door open to diplomacy.
I think we're always open to diplomacy. It has to be real. It has to be a deal that they're willing to live by. Look, Iran a week ago was supposed to put out a statement saying that the Straits of Hormuz would be open, that they would no longer attack shipping. And instead of doing that, they attacked 3 ships. I think that was last Friday or Saturday. So, I mean, their behavior has to change in order for ours to change. What I will say is that the United States always remains open to a diplomatic solution. We've tried multiple times with Iran, and we'll continue to try. If that door opens, we'll be happy to see it open. But and they continue to send signals that they want to talk, that they want to negotiate. But their behavior is what we're responding to. And their behavior is they're launching missiles and drones against ships, including tonight.
And as we noted, the escalating conflict is pushing fuel prices back up. The average cost of gas is now at $4 a gallon for the first time in more than a month. Joining me now is NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba, NBC News Chief International Correspondent Keir Simmons, he's in Jordan. And with me on set are NBC News Senior National Security Correspondent Courtney Kube and NBC News military analyst, retired Colonel Steve Warren. Welcome to all of you. Monica, let me start with you. What is the White House and the latest thinking on Iran and its strategy to get back to the negotiating table? We heard a little bit of different language from the president there when he talked about acknowledging some of the capabilities Iran still has, and he, of course, acknowledged the deaths of Americans.
Certainly, Kelly, and the way that a senior administration official described it to our team may be the best way to sum this up, which is that this is a, quote, time of ambiguity, where it is unclear whether this escalation from a military sense is going to produce what could be this alternative outcome of getting to a negotiated situation where there could be potentially still some diplomatic solution, which you did see Secretary Rubio nodding to there, but President Trump very clearly sending a message today say on social media that there will continue to be military action, especially in regards to those fallen service members, and acknowledging that. So the question is, what could really change or move things from the direction that we have seen, which is to continue that escalation that would get the parties back to the negotiating table in any meaningful sense? We are told by that senior official that the talks behind the scenes do continue, but it's really unclear, Kelly, what they can actually produce at this point.
Monica, we saw the president recently dismiss the idea that this is somehow a new normal. But do you think the White House would factor in economic fallout, like prices for gas going up? Is that something that might, again, cause him to take a different turn?
I think so, and you can really assess that based on how they acted when they really celebrated the Memorandum of Understanding and that signing ceremony that you saw at the Palace of Versailles in June, because the White House really took that to try to tell the American people that they should celebrate the fact that now prices were going to come down. And we did see that dip with the price of oil certainly after that, of course has now gone back up. So it's really hard to imagine that that isn't something that's being considered now and isn't something that they're certainly going to have to address, and that should factor, we believe, into the decision making from what we understand when we talk to White House officials, even though President Trump on the record was the one who said that when he does make these decisions about the negotiations with Iran, that he doesn't factor in Americans' personal financial decisions, which of course kicked off a lot of controversy, Kelly.
Changing gears a little bit, I want to get your take on something that the president talked about, and that is the new version of Air Force One. It's got the new paid scheme. This is the gifted plane from Qatar. And he talked about the fact that it will need some security upgrades, even though it's only been in service as a version of Air Force One for a short amount of time. What is happening with this, and what are the next steps?
This was significant because the president himself acknowledged that this plane, that this luxury jet that had been retrofitted to serve as Air Force One, does need additional enhancements and upgrades. And now Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, is confirming on the record that that is going to take place in the coming weeks, though she does write in a statement that the plane is perfectly safe for the president's travels, but they are going to look at that, and it is likely going to take approximately 1 month to complete those enhancements. And so during that time, Kelly, we can expect the president to be traveling on the older Air Force One, the one that he did end up flying back from Turkey to that airbase in the UK before getting back on the new jet to fly in the US. So the question is when that will happen and whether it will impact his potential next foreign trip. Kelly.
And it does raise questions about, should that plane have been in service at all? What will it cost taxpayers? Much more to follow on that. Thank you so much, Monica. Keir, let me turn to you now. You're in Jordan, and that, of course, is one of the countries that Iran is targeting as part of what is broadly being called retaliatory strikes. What is the mood like there? And are people in the region, and specifically where you are, worried about how this could spiral into even greater military conflict?
Well, I think people already feel as if they are facing a full-scale conflict here. We had alarms again, air raid alarms, air raid sirens, Kelly, just in the past few hours here in Amman, Jordan, the capital of the country. Those missiles, according to the Jordanians, 3 missiles were intercepted to the east of the country. But just another night when the Iranians have fired on this country. And of course, it was a night like this when those servicemen and women were killed here. And it just continues, the bombardment, no matter President Trump's warnings to Iran that it would face exponentially more deaths for every American soldier that it killed. The Iranians are doubling down. It's not just here in Jordan, it is in Kuwait and in Bahrain and across the region. This is escalatory. And the point is really, I mean, you call it an escalatory spiral. It's hard to see where the off-ramp is for either side, honestly.
So Secretary Rubio says diplomacy is still engaged. We want to see that as an option. How difficult do you think it is, based on all your reporting, to get the two sides back to the table in a constructive way?
I mean, I think it's certainly possible. The spokesperson for Iran's foreign ministry today said talks are a possibility. But then again, just underscoring how challenging it is to talk to the Iranians for the US. The foreign minister, Araghchi, said in an interview just over the weekend that he actually currently doesn't have direct face-to-face talks with the key decision maker in Iran. That is the new supreme leader. So I think there's a challenge in that respect. And also that we have heard from every facet of the Iranian leadership insisting that they are continuing to try to pursue their goals, including control of the Strait of Hormuz, for example. So, yes, there can be talks. I think the question is, to what end?
Thank you so much, Keir. We'll go from Amman to right here in the studio. And Courtney, let me start with you. When you consider the military capabilities that remain for Iran, the president, I was a little surprised that he did acknowledge they have some missiles, they have some capabilities. What is left to target? And does that targeting from your reporting look like it's making any difference?
It's really hard to say, because when we look at the statements that are coming out of U.S. Central Command, it's been about 10 days of strikes now. They consistently talk about sort of broad categories of what the U.S. is going after. Things like coastal radar sites, missile launch sites, drone launching sites, and we aren't getting specificity about exactly how many strikes they're taking anymore or the location. Now, frequently, they say that it is in direct response to Iran targeting commercial shipping in the Strait of Hormuz, but we aren't hearing as much about it being along the coast as we were initially. And then just to add to that, on Saturday, CENTCOM specifically said that they went after targets that were responsible for the attack that killed those 2 U.S. soldiers in Jordan, injuring many more. In fact, frankly, we just, in the last few moments, we got on social media, the chief spokesperson for the Pentagon announced that there have been nearly 100 Americans injured over the last 9 or 10 days, since July 7th, I think it was. So that's dramatically higher than what we had been hearing over the weekend, and we don't have any sense of where those attacks took place or exactly the nature of their injuries. He does go on to say that the majority of those have been returned to duty. But again, there's a lot of opaqueness and lack of transparency about what exactly is happening.
Let's just live with that for a second. So we know 17 deaths, and now they're telling us more than 100 American service members have suffered some kind of injury. And those that go back to duty, obviously, it was a minor injury, but that is a significant number.
And it could, some of those, remember, some of the return to duty could be suspected traumatic brain injury, because there's like a protocol where they'll watch them for days or even weeks and see if they start to develop symptoms. And that can ultimately lead to, you know, a serious ailment, something that they can even spend months, if not years, recovering from. But yes, it does appear that the majority of them have been returned to duty. But again, it just shows we've been asking for days about the exact number of how many Americans have been injured. And now we don't even know where all of these attacks occurred or when.
Well, maybe your questions help to prompt that. Before I go to the Colonel, do you get a sense, based, again, on the expertise and reporting you bring to the table here, is there a perceived hole in the U.S. ability to protect forces in the region? Is that something we're sort of seeing based on the fact that injuries are occurring?
Yes, absolutely. So it's not a secret that the U.S. military has expended a huge number of their defenses. So things like the interceptors that are launched from a THAAD or from a Patriot, those are the ones that are literally a missile. They launch up and they target and they slam into an incoming ballistic missile or some other kind of projectile, and in some cases a large drone, and take them out. Well, we know that the military has expended a huge number of those, not just during this war, but also during the 12-day war with Iran and Israel last summer. So it takes months and years to replace these inventories, and they simply have not had the time to do so. Even with stepped-up production efforts by the Defense Industrial Base here in the United States, they still are way behind where they need to be. And the question is, are attacks like the one that we saw in Jordan the realization that the U.S. military simply does not have everything they need to defend the people who are there? Keep in mind, early on, when this war was starting, and even before it started, the U.S. military did pull a significant number of people out of the region. But there's still people there, more than 50,000 of them, who could be in harm's way.
That's concerning information. So, Colonel, let me go to you. You had a role in Operation Inherent Resolve, which was the mission against ISIS, and as a spokesperson. And I was reminded of that today. And it's very fitting to ask you about this, because the Pentagon is currently saying some of these deaths are associated with that mission and not what we commonly think of as the Iran war. You're a communicator in the military, as well as having, as a colonel, you had a real-life world experience. Does that make sense? And are these still retaliatory, or is this part of kind of a new offensive?
Sure. Two largely different questions.
Yes.
Most likely, the reason
the
Pentagon has identified those killed in Jordan as part of Operation Inherent Resolve is because that's what they were there for in the first place, right? Those troops may well have deployed 6 or 8 months ago as part of that operation, and so they're sort of attached to that operation. The Iranians don't care, right? They don't care what operation
they're exploiting
is
that.
on. They're just shooting at anybody they can find, right? So I think that's that. To build on what Courtney said regarding holes in our defenses. You know, the other important thing to keep in mind, and we have a saying in the military, right? The enemy gets a vote.
Yes.
And the Iranians have learned, right? They are learning over time how to attack American defenses, whether it's different angles of attack, whether they bring their missiles in from a different location, or whether they use swarm attacks. So in any defense, there's always going to be what we sometimes in the Army call leakers. Something's going to leak through. That's always a possibility. And now that the Iranians are able to refine their offensive tactics, we will have to now refine our defensive tactics.
So we've heard from the president obliterated, but you're describing an adaptive ability to use what they have to continue to be in the fight.
That's exactly right. Every enemy learns, every foe learns, they adapt, they improvise, they figure out new ways to deal with what they're facing. And let's keep in mind, the Iranians, you know, they refined IEDs during the war in Iraq. You know, they created, you know, new ways to attack American soldiers, and you know, they were partnered with the Iraqis often, and so they are experienced at evolving the way they fight to adapt to the way the Americans fight.
There's another actor from the region that may be wanting to engage here, and that's the Houthis, who are talking about wanting to stop Saudi Arabia from using the Strait of Hormuz. What is your sense of how they would be involved in this, and how much of a concern is it?
Well, the other thing we have to think about is what cards everybody has to play, right? The Americans, we have more cards we can play, and you've heard some of that being talked about, whether it's an assault on an island somewhere, whether it's, you know, intensified strikes deeper into Iran. Well, the Iranians have cards they can play as well, and one of those cards is the Houthi card, right? So they can encourage the Houthis to shut down.
Like a force multiplier for
them. It's like a force multiplier. They're a proxy force, a term we've used often. So the Iranians can now energize the Houthis to begin creating a second set of problems for us, additional economic hardship, you know, lots of things the Houthis can do in the Bab el-Mandeb Straits, which is another choke point. And oh, by the way, let's not forget the Houthis have the capability to range even the Suez Canal.
Yeah. And I can tell from your body language, Courtney, that you are checking the latest from your sources.
Yeah, we just found out about 15 minutes ago that the U.S. started another round of strikes against Iran. So I mean, what's
day
really
10 now.
This is day 10. Yeah. So what's really telling is every day now when they announce that they're doing these strikes, I always look to see exactly what the justification or the reason is. And this is another one where CENTCOM is saying that it's to degrade Iran's military capabilities to attack commercial shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. So unlike over the weekend where they said it was not only to go after those assets that were attacking commercial shipping, it was also then about retaliation for the U.S. military service members who were injured and killed. Now this seems to be back to specifically for the Strait of Hormuz. We'll see how it continues to evolve, though.
Kelly, this is an example of miscalculations that begin to skid out of control, right? The Iranians miscalculated. The initial miscalculation was to attack that commercial shipping as it was going through the straits. We then reacted, as you would expect we would. I don't know that we calculated how hard the Iranians would push back. Now Americans are killed. Now this is beginning to spiral even more out of control.
It certainly makes it more complicated, more difficult for the president. We also know that he does plan to go to Dover to receive the fallen service members when they return back to the United States. Thank you both for your expertise. We really appreciate that.
We thank you for watching. And remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.